Hello viewers, welcome to the Bachelor course of Population Studies. Today we will discuss about the methods and techniques of population research. The first step in research is to develop a research problem and make a research plan. The next step is to collect the data. For collection of data, two types of data are kept in mind: primary data and secondary data. Primary data is collected afresh. It is collected for the first time and is thus original in character. This is data that has never been gathered before, whether in a particular way or at a certain period of time. Secondary data are those which have already been collected by someone else and have already passed through the statistical process. For population research, we generally use the primary methods of data collection. We will discuss 4 broad techniques of primary data in this chapter. Following are the techniques of primary data collection: interview method, questionnaire or mail survey method, schedule method, and observation method. Starting with the first method, that is the interview method. Interview is a verbal conversation between two people with the objective of collecting research relevant information. Lindsay Gardner has defined interview as a two-person conversation initiated by the interviewer for the specific purpose of obtaining research relevant information and focused by him on the content specified by the research objectives of description and explanation. An interview can be structured or unstructured. The structured, or you can say patterned, interview format has, as the name implies, a structure to it. This is a set of predetermined questions that will be asked to each candidate for a position. The unstructured interview is not pre-planned, and the interviewer will ask a wide range of questions at random. There are face-to-face interviews or personal interviews. These interviews have a distinct advantage of enabling the researcher to establish rapport with potential participants and therefore gain their cooperation. It is a two-way communication between the interviewer and the respondent. These interviews yield highest response rates in the survey research. They also allow the researcher to clarify ambiguous answers and, when appropriate, seek follow-up information. Let's see what are the steps in conducting the interview. An interview should go through the given 5 stages. Number 1, rapport building. Number 2, introduction. Number 3, probing. Number 4, recording. And finally, the closing of the interview. There are certain disadvantages of this face-to-face interview method. This method of data collection is impractical when the size of population is very large. It becomes time-consuming and expensive. The second type of interviews are telephone interviews, which are less time-consuming and less expensive, and the researcher has ready access to anyone on the planet that has a telephone. But these interviews are also not without disadvantages. The disadvantages are that the response rate is not as high as the face-to-face interview, but considerably higher than the mailed questionnaire. Telephone interviews enable researcher to gather information rapidly. Like personal interviews, they allow for some personal contact between the interviewer and the respondent. But some people may not have telephones. People often dislike the intrusion of a call to their home. Telephone interviews need to be relatively short or people feel imposed upon. Many people don't have publicly listed telephone numbers. The third type of interviews can be computer assisted personal interviews, CAPI. It's a form of personal interviewing, but instead of completing a questionnaire, the interviewer brings along a laptop or a handheld computer to enter the information directly into the database. This method saves time involved in processing the data as well as saving the interviewer from carrying around hundreds of questions. However, this type of data collection method can be expensive to set up and requires that interviewers have computer and typing skills. Another type of interview is the video conferencing. Video conferencing is often used as a more personalized version of the telephone interview. Recruiters conduct live face-to-face interviews with the applicants via personal computers equipped with cameras and speakers. Then there are depth interviews. Depth interviews are one-to-one encounters in which the interviewer makes use of an unstructured or semi-structured set of issues, topics to guide the discussion. The objective of the exercise is to explore and uncover the deep-seated emotions, motivations, and attitudes. They are most often employed when dealing with sensitive matters. Most of the techniques used in the conducting of depth interviews have been borrowed from the field of psychoanalysis. Depth interviews are usually only successful when conducted by a well-trained and highly skilled interviewer. So we have seen different types of interviews. Let's discuss the advantages of interview method. This method can be used to collect qualitative facts. Interview method allows for greater flexibility in the process of questioning, especially in unstructured interviews. There are very few chances of misinterpretation, especially for structured interviews. The validity of the information provided in interviews can be easily checked. A smart interviewer can always check when the respondent is hesitant to answer or even if he is lying. We can gather information in detail in case of an interview. But the method is not without the disadvantages. Let's see what are the disadvantages of interview method. The interview method is quite time-taking when the population size is large. The analysis and interpretations made by the interviewer depends on his state of mind, his physical health and his mood, etc. This can cause variability of data. The extent of variation increases when more than one interviewer is collecting the data. This method turns out to be very expensive when large geographical area is covered or the population size is very large. The respondent may get affected by the presence of the interviewer. The second method of data collection is the primary survey method or the questionnaire method. Now, what is a questionnaire? A questionnaire refers to a device for securing answers to questions by using a form which the respondent fills in himself. A questionnaire is designed with a dual objective. Firstly, to achieve success in collecting reliable and dependable information in a short span of time. And secondly, to collect information from respondents scattered in a wide area. What can be the features or characteristics of a good questionnaire? A good questionnaire has the given characteristics. It should be neatly typed and presented on a good quality paper. A good questionnaire covers the topics adequately without asking irrelevant questions. The instructions are clearly in detail and can be easily understood. The questions generally move from simple to difficult level or from general to specific level. The questionnaire should be of right length to get the essential data. The questions should be objective and should not show bias or give hint towards the desired answer. It should be clearly worded, unambiguous questions arranged in a logical sequence. Also, the sensitive and personal questions and double meaning words should be avoided. Now, how do we design a questionnaire? Designing a questionnaire is quite a process. It requires specific type of skills. It's an effort of compiling a set of questions by repeatedly checking out for errors and knowing what to include and what to avoid. Generally, designing a questionnaire has following 3 stages. Number 1, developing a design strategy, then constructing the questionnaire, and finally drafting and refining the questionnaire. In stage 1, that is developing a design strategy, we specify the information sought. Then we plan the communication mode, select the type of questionnaire during which the researcher specifies how the data will be gathered by stating the type of questionnaire. In second stage, that is in constructing a questionnaire, we determine question content, determine the response strategy, that is the researcher has to decide whether there should be structured or unstructured responses. Some of the response strategies are dichotomous questions like with 2 answers only, yes or no type, then multi-choice questions which have multiple choice answers. Determine the wordings of question. For determining these, the researcher needs to use great caution while framing a question, as a poorly phrased question will lead to a wrong response or no response. In the stage 3, we draft and refine the questionnaire. Here, we decide the question sequence, determine the physical characteristics of the questionnaire, and pre-test the questionnaires. Now, coming to the type of questionnaires, there can be many types of questionnaires. One can be paper pencil questionnaires. They can be sent to a large number of people and save the time of the researcher and money. People are more truthful while responding to questionnaires regarding controversial issues, in particular due to the fact that their responses are anonymous. Then there are web-based questionnaires. A new and inevitably a growing methodology is the use of internet-based research. This would mean receiving an email on which you would click on an address and that would take you to a secure website to fill in a questionnaire. This type of research is often quicker and less detailed. Points to be taken care while designing a questionnaire. The success of statistical investigation depends on the proper drafting of a questionnaire. It's a highly specialized job, and some points should be borne in mind while preparing a questionnaire. These are: number 1, the number of questions in a schedule should be brief and limited as possible. The questions should be simple, clear, and precise. Its language should be very simple. All unambiguous questions should be avoided. No personal questions should be asked from the respondents. Such questions should be avoided. Questions should be framed with right words. They should not be based on calculations. Number of times the respondent finds it difficult to compute. The questions should be objective, and before sending the questionnaire to the respondents, it must be properly tested. Precise and simple instructions of how to fill the questionnaire should be added in the footnote, and proper care should be taken to make the questionnaire attractive. Type of questions. Before constructing questions, you must be knowledgeable about each type of question used in the survey research. They basically include close-ended questions. These questions limit the answer of the respondent to response options provided on the questionnaire. Open-ended questions. In open-ended questions, there are no predefined options or categories included. The participants should supply their own answers. Then there are matrix questions. Metric questions are also closed-ended questions but are arranged one under the other such that the questions form a matrix or a table with identical response options placed on the top. For example, as shown on the screen, please rate the following characteristics of the product based on your satisfaction. Use a check mark, and the answers can be strongly satisfied, satisfied, neutral, unsatisfied, strongly unsatisfied. And on these basis, the size, color, shape and overall appearance of the product can be judged. Then there are contingency questions. The questions that need to be answered only when the respondent provides a particular response to a question prior to them are called contingency questions. Asking these questions effectively avoids asking people questions that are not applicable to them. For example, have you ever smoked a cigarette? Yes or no? If yes, how many times have you smoked cigarette? Once, 2 to 5 times, 6 to 10 times, more than 10 times, etc. There are certain advantages of the questionnaire method. Number 1, it's practical and economical method of data collection. Large amounts of information can be collected from a large number of people in a short period of time and in a relatively cost-effective way. It can be carried out by the researcher or by any number of people with limited effect to its validity and reliability, provided the questionnaire is nicely made. The results of the questionnaires can usually be quickly and easily quantified by either a researcher or through the use of software packages. In case of mailed questionnaire, the supervision and control effort is not required, since there is no need to appoint field workers. These can be analyzed more scientifically and objectively than any other form of research. When data has been quantified, it can be used to compare and contrast other research and may be used to measure change. Positivists believe that quantitative data can be used to create new theories and to test existing hypotheses. This method again does not suffer from an interviewer's bias. The questions to be asked are impersonal and standardized. But the questionnaire method is also not without drawbacks. It's argued to be inadequate to understand some forms of information, that is, changes of emotion, behavior, feeling, etc. cannot be caught with the help of questionnaire. Phenomenologists state that quantitative research is simply an artificial creation by the researcher, as it is asking only a limited amount of information without explanation. Questionnaires lacks validity. In case of mailed questionnaire, the researcher is unable to supplement the written replies with his own observation. There is no way to tell how truthful a respondent is being. There is no way of telling how much thought a respondent has put in. The respondent may be forgetful or not thinking within the full context of the situation. People may read differently into each question and therefore reply based on their own interpretation of the question. That is, what is good to someone may be poor to someone else. Therefore, there is a level of subjectivity that is not acknowledged. The process of coding in the case of open-ended questions open a great possibility of subjectivity by the researcher. The third method of primary data collection is schedules. A schedule is a set of questions which are answered by respondent but filled by the enumerator. Enumerator explains the aims and objectives of the investigation and also removes the difficulties which any respondent may feel in understanding the implications of a particular question. This method is very useful in extensive inquiries and can lead to a fairly reliable results. It is, however, very expensive and is usually adopted in investigations conducted by governmental agencies or by some organizations. Population census all over the world is conducted through this method. Let us differentiate between the questionnaire and the schedule. The questionnaire is generally sent through mail to informants to be answered as specified in the covering letter, but otherwise without further assistance from the sender. On the other hand, the schedule is generally filled out by the research worker or the enumerator who can interpret the questions when necessary. To collect data through questionnaire is relatively cheap and economical, since we have to spend money only in preparing the questionnaire and in mailing the same to the respondents. To collect data through schedules is relatively more expensive. Non-response is usually high in case of questionnaires, as many people do not respond and many do not return the questionnaire. As against this, non-response is generally very low in case of schedules because these are filled by the enumerator himself. The questionnaire method is likely to be very slow, since many respondents do not return the questionnaires in time, despite several reminders. But in case of schedules, the information is collected well in time, as they are filled in by enumerators. Personal contact is generally not possible in case of the questionnaire method, but in case of schedules, direct personal contact is established with the respondent. Questionnaire method can be used only when respondents are literate and cooperative, but in case of schedules, the information can be gathered even when the respondents happen to be illiterate. Wider and more representative distribution of sample is possible under the questionnaire method. But in respect of schedules, there usually remains the difficulty in sending enumerators over a relatively wide area. The success of questionnaire method lies more on the quality of the questionnaire itself, but in case of schedules, much depends on the honesty and competence of the enumerator. The fourth method of data collection is observation method. It is watching other person's behavior as it actually happens without controlling it. It's a very common method of data collection in behavioral sciences. It refers to the monitoring and recording of behavioral and non-behavioral activities and conditions in a systematic manner to obtain information about the topic of interest. Observation can be of many types: structured or unstructured observation, controlled and non-controlled observation, participant or non-participant observation, casual and scientific observation, subjective and objective observation, natural observation. So let us see what can be or what should be the characteristics of observation method. Some of the characteristics of observation method can be discussed as: number 1, behavior is observed in natural surroundings. Secondly, this method enables understanding significant events affecting social relations of the participants. It determines reality from the viewpoint of observed person or the researcher. It avoids manipulations in the independent variable. Recording of data is also not selective. What are the purposes of observation method? The major purposes of observation as described by Black and Champion can be to capture human conduct as it actually happens. In other methods, we get a statistic comprehension of people's activity. For example, tone of voice, facial expressions and content of slogans by the demonstrators can be actually recorded. Secondly, to provide more graphic description of social life than can be acquired in other ways. Thirdly, to explore important events and situations. By being present on the scene, issues that might otherwise be overlooked are examined more carefully. For example, visiting office soon after the office hours and finding that the married men and single women are working overtime, whereas single men and married women had gone home. It can be used as a tool of collecting information in situations where methods other than observation cannot prove to be useful. For example, workers' behavior during a strike. Observation method has lot of advantages, and one of them is that it is less complicated and less time consuming. It offers data when respondents are unable or may be unwilling to cooperate for giving information. It allows collection of wide range of information. There are certain limitations also, and these limitations are: lack of control. In natural settings, control over variables that affect the data is not possible. Then there is difficulty in quantification also. The data collected through observation cannot be quantified. It is difficult to categorize in-depth emotional and humanistic data. Small sample size. Observational studies use a smaller sample than survey studies. For large samples or for large population, they may not be as successful. Gaining entry. It's not always easy to observe the functioning of an organization or institution without obtaining permission from the administrator. Then in observational studies, it is difficult to maintain the respondent's anonymity. All aspects of problem cannot be studied simultaneously under this method. The observation technique studies only limited issues. Similarly, internal attitudes and opinions cannot be studied. To sum up the module, we can say that methods and techniques of population research is an important step in research design. The researcher should be very clear about the various techniques to be used for the analysis and the reasons for using the same. The analysis, results, interpretation and predictions on the basis of research depends upon the various methods and techniques used for population research. The four main methods used for the population research are interview method, questionnaire method, schedule method and observation method, as we have discussed. No single method is superior to the other, as all these methods are used in different situations depending on the requirements of the research. That's all with today's lecture. I hope this must have added to your knowledge. Next time I'll come with another interesting topic. Till then, have a nice day. Bye bye.